Persona 3's manga is by far one of the worst things I've read in recent times. If you followed the channel for any amount of time, you'd know I'm a teeny tiny Persona 3 fan. And if you're new here, then welcome, I'm glad to have you here. While it's not my favorite game in the series, I do have a lot of love for it. Persona 3's manga, on the other hand, well, not so much. Even as someone who has done character analysis videos and totally dissected Persona 3 to its core, I still don't get what they were trying to accomplish with this adaptation because it adds nothing of value and it just ruins the story. First of all, this manga took a whopping 10 years to complete because of Persona 4's manga starting production in 2009. The first Persona 3 volume released in 2007, and after the P4 manga started, they kinda just said fuck the P3 manga, just put it on the back burner. But even before that happened, it was still really bad. The fatal flaw with Persona 3's manga is that everything is out of order. For some bizarre reason that defies all logic, they skip between dates in the game all willy-nilly like a 5-year-old wrote it, which makes every single event in the game fall flat since nothing makes chronological sense, there's no actual build-up to anything, and so much more. I made a full timeline of how the Persona 3 manga storyline goes, and I can almost confidently say you'll have no fucking idea what's going on. Try to follow along, because what you're about to see and hear makes no sense. So the manga begins on November 3rd, the supposed final battle that will end the Dark Hour. This was an interesting choice and I was kind of down for it at first since it's not a bad way to set the story up since it's one of the most important dates in the game, and the setup was decent. The rest of the volume is mostly in order too. At this point I was like, okay, this isn't as bad as people were saying it is, but then things took a turn for the worse. Before I go into the worser part, let me say I thought the manga did a pretty good job up to this point with being faithful, and it was even funny in some cases, which made the upcoming events extremely jarring. Everything is normal up until the end of the first full moon operation on May 9th, but then it cuts to November 10th. Why? What sense does this make? They try to show the dynamic between Ryoji and Aigis and all that before we even know who the fuck they are, so this is just pointless to include and it makes no sense. It then cuts back to May as it leads into the Fuka rescue operation, which for some reason is also out of order. They try to do these random flashback scenes while they're already in Tartarus looking for Fuka, which makes the pacing horrible. After Fuka and Natsuki have their moment in the school, it cuts back to November 10th, but before the other November 10th flashback that we mentioned earlier, as if it wasn't getting confusing as is, and Yukari and Fuka are having a conversation where Yukari says thanks for the other day. But how the fuck are you supposed to know what they're talking about? We didn't see the other day. Before we're able to get an answer on that, Aigis appears and shows how it leads to that other November 10th flashback, and we get a small glimpse into Yukari's love for Minato, which is the name of the protagonist in the manga. This is one of the more important things that the manga did, but we'll talk about it more later. The following scene is everyone in the dorm just fucking around, and this is the first time we see Ken. We see Ken and the party just fucking around having fun with everyone before we see anything about Shinji's dynamic or his depression, which again makes the entire moment of October 4th pointless because we already know he gets over and remains in the party. And oh my god, speaking of October 4th, that shit sucks in this adaptation too, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. The next scene is even worse. In fact, this was the scene that made me hate this adaptation immediately. It skips to November 14th, which is the moment Mitsuru tells Yukari she doesn't want to go to the Kyoto trip, which falls completely flat because we don't know about the stuff with Mitsuru's dad dying, Ikutsuki being the traitor, Yukari's dad not actually being the catalyst of everything. Shit, we didn't even know about Yukari's dad being in the experiments at all yet, none of it. We barely even know why Yukari doesn't like Mitsuru in the first place. We know nothing about their dynamic, and they thought it would be okay to just show this scene before any of that? If it feels like I'm skipping things or leaving out important context, I'm not. It's genuinely just this fucking out of order. And this is only volume 3. There's 11 volumes of this manga. Volume 3 ends on them, I guess, heading to the Kyoto trip, and you'd think it would go ahead and continue to the Yukari and Mitsuru conversation from there. But nah, it doesn't, cause why would it? No. Instead, it goes into Mitsuru's flashback that you see in the answer. Why? Who knows? I don't fucking know. Can anybody tell me? God, can you give me a lifeline, please, someone? So right here is where we first learn that Mitsuru's dad died, but since we completely skipped that part of the story, it yet again falls flat. Hilariously, it cuts in the middle of the conversation to July 11th where Yukari confronts Mitsuru about hiding the truth of the Dark Hour from everyone. I'm assuming the logic behind these weird ass cuts and decisions is they wanted to show mostly everything regarding a character in a row regardless of how the sequence of events actually goes chronologically. But even if this is the case, why do it in this way? You could have achieved the same effect if you did that and kept it in chronological order of at least when it happens for each character's arc. But they don't do that. And even if that is the idea, it doesn't work. I don't know, it doesn't matter because they clearly didn't give two flying fucks about the story, so trying to make sense of it is a waste of time. So let's continue. They talk about the experiments, yada yada. Mitsuru asks Fuka for help getting info, and then just like Mitsuru, they show Yukari's flashback from the answer. Still don't know why they did this, it makes no sense, but whatever. The Yakushima beach trip starts after that scene, and here I was just so confused as to what the logic of the cuts were because they just kept getting worse and worse. But again, they didn't care when they made this, so why should I at this point? Yukari learns the supposed truth of her father, and then Minato consoles her, which is actually a pretty good scene in a nutshell, I'll give it that. And then we cut to November 3rd. Weirdly, they only show no shit 2 pages of this date, which is supposed to be Yukari's viewpoint of the fight, which would be cool if they didn't. You know what, you can guess what I was gonna say there. November 4th happens, Akutsuki is the traitor, Mitsuru's dad dies, and then Aigis and Koro save everyone. We still have not seen Aigis or Koro join the team, nor have we seen them at all, so this scene, yet again, falls flat. It cuts back to the middle of that conversation with Yukari and Mitsuru in Kyoto, and Mitsuru finally evolves her persona. Not. It cuts again for the second time to November 5th, where we can see Yukari evolve her persona instead, and then cuts back to Kyoto for like the 3rd time or something, where we can finally see the conversation end. Now check this out, because this is just awesome and shows why their priorities really lied when making this. It goes to the Kyoto bathhouse scene, and this one has no cuts whatsoever, and they also made Mitsuru's bust size like 4 times bigger because that's where the priorities really should be. Not making the story good, but making Mitsuru's boobs bigger, because that's really what this manga adaptation was made for, I guess, because they skipped everything to do it. Just W, man, W adaptation. The boys get caught and executed, which concludes volume 4. So within the first 4 volumes, we have seen Mitsuru and Yukari's character arcs in their entirety. What this means is that anything regarding these 2 characters going forward is damn near worthless, since we've already seen everything we need to know for the most part, and we still have 7 more volumes. Volume 5 is where we finally see Strega for the first time, and surprisingly it is their canonical first appearance where they laid that dude out like a sack of potatoes, so that's nice at least, I guess. We also get to see Ken finally join the party instead of just being around for no reason. Something important to note though is that Ken joined Cease on July 28th rather than about September 2nd like he normally does in the game. They also did this in the Persona 3 movies, so the manga might be where they got this idea from. With that in mind, the story goes into the Justice and Chariot Arcana fight, where Ken is not present. So what the fuck was the point of having him
Fuck it. Like I was saying.
Strega confronts Cease, yada yada, happy days, they defeat the shadows and go on their merry way. Right after that, Shinji and Strega talk about the situation, Shinji says to fuck off, and in literally the same page, both Ken and Shinji are shown fighting together. What? When I read this, I thought I was going insane. I thought something was actually wrong with my brain because I was reading it all in like one sitting, but no, like I didn't get a misprint. There was nothing wrong with my brain. It just shows Ken and Shinji on the team before even showing them joining the team. But then on the very next page, it shows Shinji when he's not on the team and goes to the conversation where Akihiko is trying to convince him to join. By the way, Yukari says what Strega and them said in the bunker hit their insecurities and made it harder to summon their persona. But since we already saw her evolve past this point, it's fucking pointless. Whatever. Shinji joins the team right after, which is on August 9th, and with how they approached Yukari and Mitsuru, you'd think it would do the same for Ken and Shinji, right? Well, it doesn't do that because that wouldn't work with Junpei's character arc. So instead of doing that, it shows Junpei meeting Chidori for the first time on August 16th. They show all of their meetings at Port Island Station in a row, and then it goes to the Hermit Boss. In this boss, it also does the thing from the movies where Ken finds out Shinji was the killer via seeing his persona rather than knowing beforehand, which would be awesome had it been elaborated on more like it was in the movies, but obviously this manga just sucks balls, so they didn't do that. The stuff with Chidori and Junpei happened mostly as normal from then on, only minor difference being Minato's aura farming when he knocks the evoker out of Chidori's hands. After the Hermit Boss, it goes into all the Junpei and Chidori hospital scenes, which goes into that argument between Akihiko and Shinji about the persona suppressants. This moment sucks balls because they have shown zero of Akihiko's character up to this point. So why would I give a flying fuck about Akihiko at this point? So that moment sucks, who would have guessed, but we actually get a somewhat good moment, believe it or not, when it cuts to September 21st. So after Minato wakes up from his cold, Ken and Minato have a one-on-one conversation where Ken expresses his internal doubts about going through with killing Shinji. Minato says, "Do what feels right for you," which is a pretty solid response had it not been for this context. But I kinda like that actually. He can't read minds and it shows Minato ain't perfect, so it's a solid moment, not gonna lie. Since the manga has been showing Fest exclusive content, they sneak in the Shinji and Koromaru security tape footage in there as well, which is fine, whatever. Shinji cooks for everyone and they have a little party, which then brings us to October 4th. This basically happens the same way as well, besides the fact that Ken actually strikes at Shinji in this version. Takaya shows up looking absolutely fucking ugly in this panel. I mean, my god. He lays Shinji out, that's about it. Well, Akihiko does swing at Takaya, but he fails, so yeah, good to go in there, Akihiko fucking W. This is the point in the manga where the pacing becomes truly dog shit. Shinji's death is just ass in this version because he's just standing up for the entirety of his speech, then when he does, he falls down, and then it just immediately cuts to the funeral. You don't get to see a small message like, "We suffered our first casualty." You don't get to see the protag struggle to go to school on the next day. You don't get to see Yukari's worry for Akihiko. You don't see nothing. Just straight into the funeral, and then it goes straight into Akihiko's awakening scene. The scene itself is fine, but the moment where Ken awakens his persona, this is probably the worst moment of the entire fucking manga, and that's seriously saying something. So you know how in the game and literally every good adaptation of this story ever, or even the bad ones, Shinji asks Akihiko to look after Ken and take care of him. Well, in the manga, he just doesn't do that. He just says, "Fuck that, I'm fucking gonna be Aki Bummo, whatever." I'm gonna go insane, dude. This manga's so bad. Okay, let me get back on track. When Ken runs out on his own and Cease can't find him, instead of going out and looking for him to help him in his dark time like he does in the game or whatever, Ken just moves on his own. 2 days after the most traumatic experience of his life, bar his mother dying, he moves on with no support, no guidance, no nothing. This makes Akihiko look like a fucking worthless bum for one, and it goes against the entire premise of Persona. You just left this kid on his own. Persona is about having strength and friendship, but Ken just managed to move on with literally zero help at all, just 2 days after indirectly getting someone killed? I mean, yeah, fucking right, dude. I mean, this was finicky in the game itself, but this is just another level of stupidity. After that, Ken comes home, yay, happy time, just fuck off. That marks the end of Volume 5, and what a fucking dog shit ass volume that was, god damn. Now for Volume 6, I got something shocking to say, so I'm gonna need you to sit down. No. Matter of fact, I need you to lie down for this. This volume of the manga is in order.
Holy fucking shit!
It starts on October 20th, and from start to finish, it's just in order. But this really begs the question, why the fuck is everything else out of order then? Whatever, let's just take our wins as they come, let's not think about it too hard. This chapter is dedicated almost solely to Junpei and Chidori's character, and since most of this happens in one long stretch, besides the stuff they've shown already, it means they can just keep it in order. Nice! This means I also don't need to go super in detail since this is just meant to be a breakdown of the changes, so thank you for giving me a break. Something important to note before we even go into the story though, is that this was around the time the Persona 4 manga was starting to release, and the mangaka was the head of both adaptations. So at this point, Persona 3 was starting to be put on the back burner. The funny part about this is that while yes, each volume took at least a year to release, this is the point where the manga stops being super garbage, just kinda mid. But unfortunately, the pacing and changes up to this point are just a killing blow. So like I said, most of this stuff is all in order. Junpei and Chidori get closer, Fuka awakens her persona, which is cool in the manga since she actually sees Natsuki off to the station, and so on and so forth. There's a few really good panels and moments, but nothing too noteworthy until November 22nd, when Chidori sacrifices herself for Junpei. This moment in the manga is actually pretty damn dope, because Junpei's persona basically goes berserk and he nearly burns Takaya alive. The only reason he survives is because Yukari decides to heal him. This might seem like a dumb decision, and yes, in the grand scheme of things, it is. But if you know how Yukari is as a character, then this is actually pretty interesting. Yukari's whole character is not wanting to let those around her die, so even though this is her enemy, she can't in good conscience let him die in front of her. It's a pretty good moment, man, and it really makes me wish the manga was more like this because it has these sprinkles of greatness, but everything around it is just shit. You can't put sprinkles on shit and make it taste good. After that, there's a manga exclusive scene where Yukari and Mitsuru talk about Chidori's sacrifice and how she helped Takaya, which again is cool. That's all that's really noteworthy to talk about with Volume 6 as far as the manga goes, but Volume 7 gets a bit more interesting. The first half of this volume is from Aigis' perspective, but again, it's all out of order again. Just goddamn it, dude, just keep it in order, man. Fuck. It starts with her fighting Ryoji, then basically Aigis gives a rundown on how she came to be, what her purpose is, how she joined 3's, you know, all the shit we should have known already, but whatever. Important to note here is that once this little callback or flashback or whatever you want to call it scene is done, the manga from this point forward is in order. That's right, the last 4.5 volumes all revolve around December and January in-game, which I guess is fine if you already know how the story goes, but as an adaptation, I think this is a massive fumble. Regardless, I don't have to shit on it for being out of order anymore. The worst it does is weirdly implement Yukari and Aigis' social links in between certain story sections, but other than that, it's fine. This leads me into the biggest difference the manga made from the game that I kinda alluded to earlier, that being Yukari and Aigis' feelings toward Minato. In Persona 3 FES, which this adaptation is obviously based off of, Minato has to romance every girl. That's just how that game was designed, and the manga tried to implement this dynamic in a bit of a different way. So throughout this adaptation, it's been made clear that both Aigis and Yukari love Minato romantically, and instead of them deliberately choosing one over the other like let's say the movie did, they just went with both. Since the story is mostly the same by this point, I'll just focus on this dynamic. Near the start of Volume 9, not too long before the final battle against Ryoji, Aigis starts having a mini panic attack about her feelings with Minato, so she goes to Fuka for some advice. She vents about her machine-like nature and not knowing what she really wants, but Fuka helps her figure things out. Yet again, this is a great scene and it's a serviceable replacement, if you will, to that part of her social link, which makes it even more frustrating that the first half of this manga is so bad. Near the end of the same volume, when the career counseling event happens, the event with Aigis on the rooftop happens as well. Aigis tells Minato her feelings and that she wants to be by his side forever, but doesn't explicitly say I love you. Yukari in this adaptation was listening into the conversation, and rather than being sad or angry, she's kinda just okay with it. After that, Yukari goes to Aigis' room and outright says she is going to confess her love to Minato after the Judgment Day, and that Aigis should do the same. They make some small talk and laugh at each other about their feelings over him, which is a really cute moment. This is the kind of shit the manga could have been doing the entire time, giving a different take on the events and characters rather than playing Scramble with the timeline and throwing shit at a board. It almost feels like they got tired of doing what they were doing before and just said, fuck it, let's do something else, or that there was a different author. But there wasn't. I guess this really was what it was planned to be the entire time. Just why? Yukari, Aigis, and Junpei might have some solid moments that give the manga some value, but everyone else is just left in the fucking dust. Shinji, Ken, Fuka, Akihiko, and especially Koromaru feel so pointless to this adaptation, to where if you aren't a massive fan of those first 3 characters, then you just couldn't enjoy this manga. Like, there's no way. Hell, I am a massive fan of them. I wrote an hour-long analysis for Yukari alone. So seeing something like this was cool, but I don't know, bro. Like, if I wanted more Yukari or Aigis or anyone fan service, I could either play the games again, play Persona 3 Dancing, or just watch the movies and have, like, good content. This manga is just frustrating, man. Like, I don't know what more to say. The final things to mention for this adaptation are the Judgment Day and the very divisive Promise Day events, so let's go into those. The Judgment Day happens the exact same way as the movies, more or less. There's some stupid things like Junpei somehow just taking multiple gunshots from Takaya, but nothing groundbreaking to go into. I did like what they did during the Nyx Avatar fight though with their Arcana, where they showed the characters themselves for each respective phase. That was pretty cool. Minato awakens to Messiah to fight Nyx Avatar, he ends up getting the Universe Arcana and performs the Great Seal. Something you need to remember though is that the thing with Ryoji telling Aigis about her finding the answer to life and all that still happens here. This implies they're still setting up the events of the answer. This is important for what possibly happens going forward. After sealing Nyx, we of course come to the Promise Day. The start of this is cool actually, where it's from the perspective of Aigis rather than Minato for the first little bit. Aigis awakens, doesn't know where she is or why she's in the dorm, but she knows there's a good reason for it. She eventually sees Minato again, which brings back both of their memories, and the rest of the day revolves around Minato trying to edge everyone else back into remembering as well. That night, Minato shows signs of sickness that I'm sure we all know the reason to and falls asleep. From there, everything is the same with the promised day where Aigis and Minato beat everyone to the roof and they eventually remember. But this is where the manga is potentially the worst adaptation ever known to mankind. Not really, that's pretty dramatic, but it's pretty bad potentially. So at the end of this manga, rather than making it explicitly clear or at least clearly alluding to the death of the protagonist like every other adaptation, the manga ends like this, where he stands up and looks totally fine. Now, there's a couple ways to interpret this. 1. Minato in the manga somehow managed to live slightly longer than the other adaptations and then dies later on. Or 2. Minato strictly lives and does not die at all. Now, I'm a fan of happy endings. I mean, Persona 4 is my favorite Persona game, and that has a pretty happy ending, debatably the happiest ending of them all. But if Minato does survive in this manga, then this completely ruins the story. It means the answer does not exist, which leads to Aigis obtaining neither the wild card nor the answer to life. It makes the whole theme of Memento Mori and Minato having death inside of him fall flat. It means the Great Seal was just temporarily needed, which is just impossible, because it can't be temporary. It's the desires of all humanity. It doesn't just go away. It causes so many issues if he lives. So why would they even leave it up to this kind of interpretation at all? We know canonically he dies, so why even bother trying to do this song and dance? I mean shit, the manga concluded on February 27th, 2017. So we already had Persona 3, Persona 3 Fest, Persona 3 Portable, Persona 4 Arena, Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, the Persona 3 live stages, and all 4 Persona 3 movies. None of these tried to do this because they knew this would ruin the story. So why in the fuck did they think this would be a good idea? If you ask me, I choose to believe he still died since all signs still point to it. But I can't even begin to understand why they did it this way because it makes something that should be completely incontestable needlessly ambiguous. Just add that to the long laundry list of everything this manga does wrong, I guess. Am I taking this adaptation too seriously? Maybe, you might be right if you say that. But just because it's a side adaptation doesn't mean it's free from criticism. This adaptation completely ruins the Persona 3 story in so many ways, and I for the life of me cannot figure out why. The Persona 1 manga that was released several years before this one was one of the best things I've ever read. I mean, I made a whole hour 18-minute video on that and how much I loved it. And that was also just an adaptation. But the difference is it took the game and made it better. This one decided to just put shit in random order while cutting vital moments that are integral to characters. It's just stupid. I could have gone even more in depth with all the smaller things this adaptation does wrong, but at this point I think I made my point clear. This adaptation is shit. If you want to read it, then by all means go for it. I mean, I own all 11 volumes physically myself, but I under no circumstances can recommend this to anyone who is not a diehard Persona fan. And I say this as someone who is generally positive toward Persona in all aspects. This adaptation has broken my mind and spirit, so if you want to help me recover, all I ask for is a like and a sub. It helps me out a lot, and I'll give you a free cookie as always. Here you go, homie. It's been your boy Yandere Gogeta, P3's manga sucks balls, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out everybody, and have a great day.